Welcome. This is presentation number 14 in our series Rereading the Fourth Gospel. The fourth Gospel is the story of Jesus the Revealer. And we have now come to an evening, a protracted evening scene. And in the conversation that happens on that evening, Jesus will say, "I have called you friends." And that is our topic for this time. So we are in chapter 13. We have spent quite a bit of time in chapter 12, which is a very critical and crucial chapter. And now we're heading into the home stretch even more in chapter 13. Now, before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from the world, from this world, and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. That's how it starts. It's a Thursday night, if we do the chronology here, the timeline, and the timeline is a little fuzzier toward the end of this gospel, but it seems like we have reached the Thursday night, and it's less than 24 hours to go before Jesus will be dead and buried. So the last evening, you might say. 5 chapters 13 to 17, are set. The setting is in that Thursday night setting. So that's a long stretch for a very short period of time. It's quite remarkable. And so in those chapters we have the foot washing. We have the first mention of the beloved disciple. I left out beloved there. First mention of the beloved disciple. And we have the story of Judas leaving the community. But most of it is an extended meditation and a farewell discourse. That's what we have here in these chapters. A storm is brewing, but it is as it were, there is calm in the eye of the storm. So Jesus will die. There will be a lot of commotion here, and we can feel it already here in this Thursday evening. But we are sitting inside the eye of the storm, in a sort of calm center, and there is a luminosity to this scene. It's a time for revelation. So that theme is not letting up. So a storm is brewing, but there is calm in the eye of the storm, a luminous calm, a time for revelation. And then you might wonder, is there literature, anything else in literature with which to compare it? And in ancient literature, yes, there is a farewell scene. The second most famous farewell scene, probably in literature, is the story of Plato's description of the death of Socrates, the trial and death of Socrates. It's way up there as a farewell story. And it might be worth looking at it and comparing the stories. That's sometime when you are up to it. The story of Jesus' farewell will not be the loser in that comparison. And there is the book by James Joyce in modern times, who spends more than 700 pages in the book Ulysses, describing just one day in the person's life. And so you can do here 4 or 5 chapters for one evening here, and it's fine. There's not a problem there. I'm not presenting that as a problem. John can do that if James Joyce can spend a whole book describing one day in the life of a less important figure than Jesus. We read on. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, that he should betray Jesus. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. And here my illustration is Tintoretto, around 1550 or so. And you can see how he illuminates the various characters here. It's quite an amazing painting, how each one is given a little light, and then Jesus, here he shines brighter than the rest. And just a scene worth studying. But what do we have? Yes, what do we have here? We have Jesus acting with the consciousness of who he is. He is the revealer. He knows where he had come from, and he knew where he was going. So that he had come from God, he was going to God, and he is in the world to reveal God. And Jesus knows that. And then he disrobes. And disrobes is a body language. The body, it's a gesture of unveiling and revelation, as it were. He is laying himself bare in preparation for being made bare in the death scene, in the crucifixion scene. And then again, the sort of slow motion here, the need for playing this in slow motion. Remember, we have talked earlier about narrative time and actual time. The movements here are slow, liturgical, and regal. These are amazing things, and it takes a while to do these things, what he will do in the foot washing. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. And you can imagine this, as many artists have imagined it. It takes a while to wash someone's feet. It's not done in just a split second. It takes a while. There is something lingering. There is obviously something tender about it. There is intimacy. And it takes time. And yes, you concentrate on washing the person's feet. But maybe once in a while you also look up into the person's eyes whose feet you are washing. So these are bonding activities, bonding movements, as it were. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You do not know what I am doing, but later you will understand." Peter said to him, "By no means will you wash my feet ever." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." This is an amazing conversation. This is an amazing conversation. And our artist here, which is 14th century, will capture it as best he can. Notice that the older the artist, the more likely the figures in these paintings will have a halo around their faces. The halo disappears in later, more realistic art. But here is Jesus and Peter, or Jesus and Peter remonstrating here in this, Peter protesting and Jesus explaining to him, and Peter coming around and gradually accepting it. So we're going to take a little time out here, and I want us to listen to two marvelous readers of the Gospel of John again. We have made their acquaintance earlier, Sandra Schneiders. She is now, I think, 85 years old, and I'm sure she is retired. And Gail O'Day, we have met her before. She is deceased, unfortunately. And I'm quoting here now from Sandra Schneiders, who has written a chapter in her book about friendship, about the sort of friendship and service in the Gospel of John. Here first, she will put what Jesus is doing in the category of service and explain to us the meaning of service. I think she does it very well. Service is generally understood univocally as something that one person does for someone else, intending thereby the latter's good. In service, the server lays aside, as Jesus lays aside his robe, as it were. The server lays aside temporarily or even permanently his or her own project, goal, good, or at least convenience, for the sake of fostering the good of the other. That seems to me to be very well said and perfectly descriptive of what we are seeing, the meaning of service here in the context of the Gospel of John. But then she also talks about relations of service, the sort of social relations in which service takes place. And she has 3 examples of it. She has the example of power, service of an inferior to a superior, which happens in a relationship of subordination. In such a relationship, you have a powerful master, someone high up there, and you have a servant who is below the master. And so this is service within a power relation. And sure, Jesus subverts that when he, as the master, takes the role of the servant. But you still cannot totally cancel out the difference, the sort of differential in the power relations. And the characteristic here would be Roman imperial times, and this is in Roman imperial times. This is the Emperor Hadrian as the master of a conquered subject in Asia Minor. This one I have seen, and here he has his foot on the servant, as it were, on the subjugated person. And Roman times, ancient times, had huge differences between master and slave, master and servant. So in some ways there is a challenge to that power relation here. And then you have relations of service in the context of need. You have a needy person and someone who is able to meet that need. Still, though, that is a relationship of inequality, as it is here, relationship of inequality, the needy person and the one who can meet the need. And you might say, in my experience as a medical doctor, so I am the physician and and there is a patient, and I can meet that person's need. Yes, I mean to serve that person, but we're not equals in the relationship. There is a needy person and the other one. And then, and this is the genius of Sandra Schneider's thing, that Jesus does not act in a power relationship. He doesn't even act in a need relationship. He acts in a context of friendship, service in a relationship based on equality. That is what he will do, not the inequality of the power relationship or the inequality of the need relationship, but the equality of the friendship relationship. This is, I think, quite amazing that she has seen that. And she pushes the point in a way that I think is quite legitimate. She says, because you will say, and the foot washing is often called in church context the ordinance of humility. That's what many have called it. So she will challenge that paradigm and in some ways do a contrast between humility and service. This is not to say that Jesus doesn't practice humility, but humility is not the best term for what he is doing. Jesus' passion in the Gospel of John is not presented as humiliation, but as glorification. It isn't going down. He acts out something that he shares generously. And we have a verse in this Last Supper context. Jesus will say, now the Son of Man is glorified. He's not humbled. He's not humiliated. He is glorified, and God is glorified in him. And then it's not an act of humility, but of love. And love and humility are not synonymous. So love controls the agenda here. He loved his own in the world, and he loved them to the end. So this is an actions emanating from love. Loving to the end can mean in a timeline, loving till the end that way, or it can mean loving fully, completely, exhaustively, as it were. And then she questions whether the sort of gratuitous self-humiliation, is that meaningful? She thinks it's a dubious idea. And what is the idea then? Jesus says at the end, after it's over, do you understand what I have done for you? Well, let's see if we can get it, or what his explanation will be. So here, again, drawing on Sandra Schneider's, she says, so trying to understand Peter's objection. That's what we are looking at here. You are not ever going to wash my feet. That doesn't sit right with me, Peter says. And we think, well, he doesn't want Jesus to humiliate himself so much. But that is not the only way of seeing it. Here is what she says. Peter realizes that Jesus, by transcending the inequality between himself and his disciples, and inaugurating between them the relationship of friendship, he is subverting in principle all structures of domination, and therefore the basis for Peter's own exercise of power and authority. The desire for first place has no function in friendship. That's true. And then she connects it to all these stories in the Synoptic Gospels, where there is a discussion going on among the disciples. Who is the greatest? Who will sit at the right hand? Who will sit at the left hand? The aspiration to be the greatest, that is a part of the problem in the community. So Peter, yes, he may well be reacting to the thought of Jesus serving him, but the structure within which that takes place is a structure that at some point could also be a benefit to Peter. One day he will be at the top and someone will be serving him. So you have a restructuring, you have a dismantling here of the structures of domination, and replacing it with a structure with no domination and with friendship. And just as an aside, and this is a real aside, I will admit that, but I couldn't help but remember my late friend Åge Rendalen, who passed away 3 years ago. He lived much of his life in Norway and many years in America, and I always admired him for the way I thought he understood America. Because he and I, coming from a more egalitarian country, I suppose, we have wondered why it seems that there is such a difference, such a difference between the haves and the have-nots in America. The 1% and the 99%, as it were, that difference. And how it is possible to win acceptance for that in political terms, in socioeconomic terms. So I wondered about that, and he wondered about that, and he explained it to me like this, similar to the implications of Peter's objection here, that people could accept that, because one day you think, I would be the 1%. You know, you preserve a system of domination, exploitation, unfairness, inequality, you name it. One day, I could be the winner. I could be the beneficiary. And if Sandra Snyder's is correct about Peter, then we should sort of put the accent there, that Jesus dismantles this not just to show him going low, but to disabuse the community of their desire to be in a position of domination. I think this is pretty amazing. A couple of other images and digressions that came to mind. The protocols of domination in international diplomacy. There was this quite embarrassing scene recently. I think it happened, I'm not exactly sure where they met, but I think it was in Turkey. And you have two of the high EU officials. This is Charles, what's his name? Michel, a Belgian. And this is the president of Turkey, Erdogan. And this is Ursula von der Leyen, who is the head of the EU Commission, the president. And they are having a meeting, and there are only 2 chairs. And she comes in, and there is supposed to be a chair equal to those chairs for her. And she remains standing there, and there is suspicion that this happened according to an intended protocol of domination, to put her on the side. So just to put this a little closer to home, here is a picture of the church leaders in the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Southern California, and they called it the conference, Southern California Conference. And the person in the middle here, Sandra Roberts is her name. She is the first woman leader of any sort of administrative structure in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And yes, it's very male-dominated. But it's worse than that, because just like there is no chair here for Ursula von der Leyen at this meeting, when the World Church in the Seventh-day Adventist context meet, there is no chair for Sandra Roberts. She is not acknowledged. She is simply erased as a figure, not desirable figure. And you will excuse me for saying that there are these in this scene here and in this scene here and its extension. We are looking at protocols of domination. And the optics is quite remarkable here. These 2 men here sitting higher up, and her in the sofa across from the foreign minister of Turkey, I think, here. And so we are in territory where you can associate, and the contrast of Jesus, the remarkability of what he does, is emphasized even more. My friends in Loma Linda, Brad and Dorothy Cole, they are neurologists, and they are also very much involved in issues of biblical interpretation. They commissioned this painting in connection with a tour they were organizing, having Jesus do a foot washing of the world leaders here. This was in Obama's time. I think that's Merkel, Putin, and Ahmadinejad, and You get the idea. I don't think it's wrong to do it. Let the imagination try it out. You call me Master and Lord, Jesus will say at the end. And that's what I am. And here I am. It's quite remarkable. We need to go back to the Gospel of John, don't we? Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. It's like he is acknowledging need. It's like suddenly the light comes on and he is all desiring Jesus to do this. Jesus said to him enigmatically, one who has bathed, is that baptism? What is it? One who has bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean, and you are clean, though not all of you. So this is pretty strong in context. And here in the sort of structuring on community, this is another painting of the Last Supper by Tintoretto. And I have seen it in my own eyes at the Prado in Madrid, and it is one of my favorite paintings, definitely. So here we have Jesus with the foot washing, and here you can imagine him with the discussion he has with Peter here. And you have the disciples, other disciples here. But the most eye-catching thing is this man eagerly, earnestly pulling off, helping his other friend, his fellow disciple, pull off the pants to get ready for the foot washing. And I need to do that with an enlarged picture here. Let's see here, I have enlarged it here. And you can see this earnestness and the sort of beauty of it. And the beauty of the foot washing that you read about in the Gospel of John. So, I'm calling this then, renaming it, rather than calling it an ordinance of humility, we're calling it now an ordinance of friendship, and reframing it. After he had washed their feet and had put on his robe, and had returned to the table. Note the slow motion here. Washed their feet, had put on his robe, had returned to the table. He said to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example that you should do what I have done for you. And the lessons to take away from this may not be as obvious as we have thought. So Jesus is not only changing what the servant is in relation to the master, but also what the servants become in relation to one another. They become friends. Master, servant, that relationship is transformed. But the relationship in our sort of social relations is also changed. And then he is upending structures of domination, whether they are based on race, religion, caste, hierarchy, wealth, and gender. You can go broad on this one. We're not going to overinterpret it if we take it to mean all of the above. And then we have many sort of strange, evocative statements, utterances that he will do in the course of this meal. In the course of the meal, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Is that a new commandment? Yes, it is a new commandment, because the meaning of the terms is deepened and expanded. So there is a commandment here like one we have never seen before. I think that's how we should look at it. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. So here we have the dimensions of love and friendship and this conversation happening after he has done this foot washing that acts out a new way of looking at each other and relating to each other. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends, Jesus will say. And my sources here, Schneider's and Gaylaudet, they are referencing that in the ancient world, philosophy also talked about friendship and had a lot to say about friendship, like Aristotle, for example, and he says, but it is also true, the virtuous man's conduct is often guided by the interest of his friends and of his country, and that he will, if necessary, lay down his life in their behalf, similar to John. And this is doubtless the case with those who give their lives for others, thus they choose great nobility for themselves. Well, is it the same territory? Well, Gaylaudet doesn't think so. She thinks that here you have ideal and reality. Jesus does lay down his life, and here you may have an ideal, but not necessarily the reality. And maybe she is right on that one. Servants no more. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant does not know what the master is doing. But I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from my Father. So this conversation at mealtime that begins with the foot washing, where Jesus enacts a new structure of friendship in the believing community. This is also now spelled out in this conversation, or is in the instruction. I do not call you servants, I call you friends. And maybe the connotation or the structure of master and servant, maybe that has been the name of the game in religion, in society. And Jesus now replaces it with another structure. So here are some contrasts that I have extracted or drawn from the text. Servants, they do not know what the master is doing. Friends, they know, there is understanding. So here there is sense of absence of understanding, or understanding doesn't matter that much. But here it matters. Friends understand. Here there is authority, submission to authority. Here, and this is not a perfect word, but here the relationship of authority is not the right one, but there is more a notion of reciprocity. And then here we have hierarchy, master, servant. Here we have more equality. I think these are fairly representative and legitimate inferences. Here, notions of obedience. Here, more a notion of concurrence, of agreement. And servants, they do what they are told. They carry out orders. But the friends, they understand and they actually do what they believe in. There is a kind of motivation coming from within and not from without. Now, Jesus replaces something not so good with something much better, doesn't he? Shouldn't we have obvious preference? I'd rather be friend than servant. Isn't that a sort of promotion of sorts? It is. But it is not necessarily a promotion that will be uniformly welcomed. And I'm taking here a little piece from Dostoevsky's book, The Brothers Karamazov, And the Grand Inquisitor who comes in the year 1500, Jesus makes a cameo appearance on earth in the city of Seville in Spain. And he is arrested by the Grand Inquisitor, and the Grand Inquisitor comes to talk to Jesus to rebuke him and to say that servants and friends is not a workable change. Jesus wanted friends, not servants, but that's not working. So he says, and he talks about it in terms of freedom, there is no more ceaseless or tormenting care for man as long as he remains free, to find someone to bow down to as soon as possible. Finding a master, standing under orders again. That is a preference for that there is, as it were, an implied advantage to being a servant. You don't have to think. You don't have to take responsibility. You just have to carry out orders. It is a more shallow relationship. Friends is more deep, a deeper relationship. But it is also a relationship that requires more from us, isn't it? I have said these things. We go to the last one now. I have said these things to you in figures of speech. The hour is coming when I will no longer speak to you in figures, but will tell you plainly of the Father. And here is a window to how speech plays out in the context of friendship. His disciples said, yes, you are. Now you are speaking plainly, not in any figures of speech. And the word in Greek is parousia. And we want to look at that word because John likes it. He's very fond of it. So now I will speak to you plainly of the Father. That's the promise here. And this is an echo, by the way, of an Old Testament text, echoes of the relationship God had with Moses. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend. Clearly, Moses is an example here, and a kind of echoes here in this text. Here, God says in Numbers, He's rebuking Aaron and Miriam. With him I speak face to face. It's actually mouth to mouth. It's even stronger. Clearly, not in riddles. And he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And then Moses will die at the end of Deuteronomy. Never since has there arisen a prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. And when the Jews sent their emissaries from Jerusalem in chapter 1 in the Gospel of John to ask about John the Baptist, they ask him, are you the prophet? Are you that figure that was supposed to be similar to Moses, that was heralded in the Old Testament? So, well, now there is a prophet like that, and that is Jesus, who talks to them and stops and talks not in riddles anymore, but plainly. So, my mentors here, Sandra Schneiders and Gail O'Day, they talk about speaking parousia, speaking openly. It's open speech, frank speech, and plain speech. And this is the language of friendship. These are the terms of interaction that belongs to the territory of friendship. So we are going to do open speech first, speaking openly first, and Jesus will then, in the first interrogation, after his arrest, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in the synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. So openness, transparency is a character of Jesus and will also be the character of the believing community. So even though here it is in the arena of the world, speaking parousia is to speak openly. And then it is to speak frankly, to speak If something had been ambiguous, it will not be ambiguous anymore. Frankly, honestly, telling it as it is, in a way. And here we have verses to that effect, even though frankly and plainly overlap here. Then Jesus told them frankly, parousia, Lazarus is dead. They had not understood that. So the Jews gathered around him and said to him, how long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us frankly. So frank speech, open speech. And here I will use an example from recent times. And I have put the headline, Friendship Without Parousia. This is parousia, frank speech, in contrast to flattering speech. That is the connotation. That is how they explain it. That is the contrast, what this word is in contrast to other ways of relating to a person. Forthright speech, honest speech, bold, courageous speech even. And speech in contrast to flattery. And yes, I do think there is some relevance to that, even though I am making this as an explanatory example, not as a political statement. But there is relevance to it when this is Liz Cheney, who is a member of the House of Representatives, who will today be voted out of her position in her party for the sin of speaking with parousia, plainly, against certain lies, untruths told, and that in some ways are empowered by people who prefer flattery to frankness. So I think there is relevance to it. Again, I say this as an example and not so much in the context of politics. And then we have plain speech. Speaking openly, speaking frankly, and speaking plainly. And we're back to the text with which we began, and this is speaking in the context of community. I have said these things to you in figures of speech. The hour is coming when I will no longer speak to you in figures, but will tell you plainly of the Father. And the disciples said, yes, now you are speaking plainly. Now this is parousia. Why didn't you do that before? Not in any figures of speech. The truth is, there is absolutely no change in the way Jesus speaks. There is a change at the level of comprehension. That's what has changed. Jesus' speech before this time, at this time, after this time, I agree with Bultmann. There is no change. But there is a change at the level of comprehension. Now we understand. And that's what friends do. Friends understand. That is the difference between the servant and the friend. And this is, in that sense, a transition point. Not so much in the way Jesus speaks, but in the way we hear it, in the way we understand it. And one final point here from Galo Day. Comprehension without enactment misses the point of parousia. Plain speaking has its effect when the disciples act on God's love for them and their love for Jesus. So understanding, yes, and then enactment. That is how this new community is going to be configured. We are at the point of summarizing here, and the illustration, Michelangelo's Lamentation, with Jesus as the central figure and the community around him, close to him, close to each other, in a community of friends. That's what we are looking here. A retrospective, I have called you friends. The Last Supper is in John, a long conversation, a moment of calm before the storm, a moment of calm in the eye of the storm. And the foot washing is better understood as an ordinance of friendship than an ordinance of humility. And to be someone's friend is a privilege, but it is a privilege with a new set of obligations, expectations. No longer servants but friends means no longer a relationship of hierarchy and subordination. Love, concurrence, and reciprocity take the place of obedience to someone's command. Parousia, a characteristic of Jesus' speech in John, is speech that is open, frank, and plain. And parousia is henceforth the language of the believing community, the language of friends.